So many people are unconsciously react in their thoughts and feelings to everything in their environment. So that in order to change, greater than the conditions in the world, greater than the circumstances, emotions are a record of the past. And if those emotions are driving your thoughts, you're thinking in the past. And if you can't think greater than how you feel, and you believe your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, you're creating more of your past, right? Which means now, their body as their unconscious mind is believing they're living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Brain and heart coherence. When there's a great communication between the brain and the heart, people are more aware, they're more healthy, they're more connected, they're more present, they're more kind, they're more loving, they're more caring.
To truly change is to think greater than your environment.
Go look it up and study and read and learn. You'll own it. And you'll say, wow, that person that was wealthy, they failed 500 times. Well, hell, I had the wrong view of wealth. Okay, then failure's not a thing. I got to overcome failure. Well, just climb the step. Okay, I'm reacting to that circumstance with the same emotion. That emotion is firing the same thoughts. I'm broadcasting the same energy into the field. If I were facing that circumstance and situation again with that person, that circumstance, what do I learn from that circumstance? How could I do it differently the next time? Find out a solution and rehearse it. Install the circuitry so when you get in the circumstance, you're not going to respond in an automatic habituation.
Yeah.
Now you're at a greater level of consciousness. Now you're looking at possibilities that you weren't looking at before because you were unconscious. Now, that process of trial and error is so important in the spiritual path. How many times do we have to forget before we remember? And then we remember and we forget again. And it takes constantly remembering until we stop forgetting. And when we get to that point, now we're conscious. Now there's wisdom. And wisdom is the memory of the experience without the emotional charge. Now you're ready for the new adventure.
To change your mind, then, is to make the brain work in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, to begin to make the brain work differently.
If where you place your attention is where you place your energy, and you have no attention in this three-dimensional reality, then all of your attention is in a realm of thought, and we would call that the quantum. So now, you can't enter the quantum field as a somebody. You have to enter as a nobody. So when you begin to get beyond yourself, what is your environment made of? People, objects, things, places, well, your body in space and time. So when you take your attention off all of those elements, you're disinvesting your attention and energy out of this three-dimensional reality, and you're placing your attention and energy in that field of possibilities, the mystical, and the interest in activating latent systems in the brain, so that people can have an experience that changes them forever. That we're not linear beings living a linear life. We're, in fact, very dimensional. And when you begin to activate these latent systems, there's a connection between the physics of the field with the biology of the brain. And when that system switches on, people really have a very profound, full-on sensory experience without their senses.
And when a person sees it as a challenge, how they draw energy, they raise the energy of their body back into order. If we said, I want to be wealthy or I want to be healthy, well, what you want to be that because you're not it. So the initiation of going from not it here to it here, you're going to have to climb some steps, and there's going to be some blind spots. So you try it out and it doesn't work. Well, that's because there's a part of you that's still in a habit. There's part of you that's still unconscious. Okay, so what is it about myself in that circumstance that I am feeling about that circumstance, and that feeling is causing me to think about it? So you say, oh, it's impossible, they'll never change, and nothing changes, right? Well, you're not separate from that experience. You're involved in it, and how you think and how you feel broadcasts energy into the field. So your energy is the same every day, and as long as your energy is the same, nothing's going to change in your life either. And nobody changes until they change their energy.
And every great person in history knew this. Whether it was William Wallace or Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Queen Elizabeth I or Joan of Arc, they all had a vision. They all had an idea. Couldn't see it, couldn't smell it, couldn't taste it, couldn't feel it. But it was alive in their mind.
some threat or some danger or some condition in your outer world, through your senses is changing how you feel in your inner world. And the quotient of change between the way you normally feel in some alarm state, when you change your internal state and move into that emergency mode, you narrow your focus on the cause, and the brain freezes an image and takes a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory. And now that image is branded holographically into the brain. So then we remember experiences better because we can remember how they feel, and that memory then changes the person's biology.
So can you believe in a future that you can't see or experience with your senses yet, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is literally changed to look like the event has already happened? Neuroscience says it's absolutely possible.
So they think neurologically within the circuits of that experience, and they feel chemically within the boundaries of those emotions, and how we think and feel becomes our state of being. Mm-hmm. So now the person biologically is changed. It's the strong emotion that begins to select and instruct the gene. Why? Yeah. Because if the environment signals the gene, and that's the truth, that's epigenetics, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, the emotion that you feel from that event is literally selecting the gene.
Gosh, it's
for
crazy.
You to begin to change. And genes make proteins. And so the person, if it's strong enough, begins to wear their trauma, not just in their brain. Now it's in their body, because every time they think about that trauma, every time they review it, every time they keep creating the imagery, they keep firing and wiring the circuits in their brain, and they keep feeling the feeling emotionally in their body. And their body is so objective that it's believing it's living in the same past experience 50 to 100 times a day. And all you need is a stimulus and a response, an image and an emotion, a thought and a feeling, and you're conditioning the body into the past. Well, you're conditioning the brain and body into the past.
So how many people actually woke up this morning and consciously created a future? You know, the biggest reason why people don't do it is because you don't really believe it's true. You see, if you knew on a gut level that it was absolutely true, would you ever miss a day?
What if they create an inner event that carries an amplitude of gratitude or joy or freedom? Break through from the chains of the past. And when the body is liberated and you feel that elevated emotion, the stronger the emotion you feel from that breakthrough, the more you're going to pay attention to the image in your mind. And now you're beginning to brand new circuitry in the brain, and your body's being conditioned into a new future. And the stronger the emotion you feel, and the more you pay attention to the picture, the more you're conditioning the body over time to the future instead of the past. So now you keep knocking on that genetic door emotionally, then that emotion ultimately signals a new gene that upregulates that gene to produce better proteins. And the person then all of a sudden starts healing. And we have research to show that people can do that just to signal stem cells to suppress, to go to active tissues and repair them and regenerate them and suppress inflammation. That we have research to show that you could change the number of brain cells you have just by doing this properly. And so,
not what you're thinking, not what you're feeling, but the combination of how you're thinking and how you're feeling, called a state of being. Now, most people wait for what? Crisis or trauma, loss, or to really want to change. They wait to the point where the ego is brought to such a low level that they cannot go on business as usual any longer. That's when we begin to look at how we're thinking, or what we believe, or how we act, or our attitude, or what emotions we're living by. And my message is, why wait? We can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, which tends to be the human model, or we can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. So the moment you begin to feel the way you think, because the brain is in constant communication with your body, you begin to think the way you feel, which makes more chemicals for you to feel the way you think. And then you think the way you feel, and then you feel the way you think, and then you think the way you feel. And some people do this for 20 or 30 or 40 years. Now, the redundancy of that cycle over time creates what I call a state of being. And a state of being is when your mind and body are working together, or your thoughts and feelings are aligned to a concept. So thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And as people get caught in this cycle of thinking and feeling and feeling and thinking, over time, they condition their body to memorize that emotion as well as the conscious mind.
But all of these three centers are consumers of energy. It's an expenditure of the life force. And these centers can easily be in balance. So each one of them have their own frequency. And when energy moves into any one of these centers, systems begin to change. I looked at all the research. And the heart, once the energy makes it to the heart acts as an amplifier. Once it makes it here, the energy goes all the way up, all the way to the brain. And the brain starts going into greater degrees of coherence. You have an enormous amount of energy in your first center. So much life force that it can create another human being. That's a lot of coiled up energy. All of that energy could make it to your heart. If it makes it to your heart, it's going to go to your brain. But why not direct it right to that mystical center, to where some conditioning, some veil, some illusion is removed every time our heart opens, every time we connect. Redistributing that energy between these first three centers. We want the autonomic nervous system balancing energy in these three systems. Imagine the same passion you have in your first center being amplified in your heart. That's a lot of love. And when it happens, sometimes it's almost like you have to malfunction for a bit. I mean, it's happened to me. I don't function very well because it's so big. I need a moment. I just need a moment to let it in. It's big. And if that energy makes it to the heart, and it can move right to those crystals in the pineal gland, and that pathway of 146 begins to become opened, and you're training your autonomic nervous system to do it. It'll redistribute that energy amongst these centers. The second center has a lot to do with consumption. And when you feel safe in your environment, your body's more in balance, and you can consume and metabolize and digest and secrete and eliminate. All those biological functions take place in the second center. In safety, then it makes sense that when you feel safe and you have food and shelter, it's in balance. But it also means that consumption of food can be really pleasurable as well. And when you take on challenges in your life and you really succeed in them, it takes energy to even get up and get out of bed. You use your third center. But all of these three centers are consumers of energy, drawing from the vital field. It's an expenditure of the life force in the body. These centers can easily be in balance because most organisms in nature, if you study species in nature, they're in balance. They're not swinging from don't eat anything to then overeat. It's not the polarity of that. It's the polarity swings, and then as we get up to this center, it swings less. And this third center is really the ceiling of the ego. That's power. And Tolkien's books about, Lord of the Rings, the ring was power. And throwing the ring meant giving up power and for something greater. And it's love. That's the greater frequency. So each one of them have their own frequency. And all frequency carries information. Frequency, energy, has an intent. And when energy moves into any one of these centers, systems begin to change. When the first center switches on because there's energy in there, that center, the energy that activates the brain in that center, produces a mind in that center. Because consciousness or energy moving through neurological tissue is mind. When neurological tissue gets activated, all of a sudden there's a mind there. So when the first center gets activated, it has a mind of its own. And if the second center is activated, or the third center, or the fourth, when you're coming from different centers, there's a different consciousness or a different intent. And when energy makes it to the fourth center, though, now it's no longer the consumption, but there's the expansion of energy. This is the bridge that starts us to connect to our divinity. And connecting to that, putting your attention on it, not only creates heart coherence, but it produces a host of biological chemicals that are released, 1,400 different chemicals that begin to restore and repair the body. Some people spend the majority of their time living in that high frequency of stress. So then teaching people then how to make a move from that sympathetic system into the parasympathetic system means they have to practice
on a daily basis. When a person begins to slow their brain waves down, they have to go, when you're in stress, when you're in survival, you narrow your focus on a cause. That's called what's called a convergent focus.